Welcome to Atlantic Cape Community College's Hazardous Materials Transportation Training. In this training, we will be discussing the U.S. Department of Transportation's regulations pertaining to the transportation and packaging of hazardous materials. Employers are required to provide this training to all Hazmat employees. The purpose of this training is to increase an employee's safety awareness and to be an essential element in reducing hazardous materials incidents. Why is Atlantic Cape giving this training? Atlantic Cape uses hazardous materials that are purchased and delivered to its campuses from various sources and ships hazardous materials, such as hazardous and regulated medical waste, to disposal facilities. While Atlantic Cape utilizes licensed contractors to package and ship hazardous materials, Atlantic Cape is still responsible for ensuring that any pre-transportation functions required under the federal regulations are properly performed. When these materials are shipped from our campuses to a disposal facility, the materials are tracked using manifest forms. The Atlantic Cape employees signing the manifest forms must receive hazmat training every 3 years on the requirements of the regulations. Why are you taking this training? The department that you work in either receives and uses hazardous materials or generates hazardous or regulated medical wastes. Additionally, security officers, the chemical hygiene officer, and the compliance officer receive this training as part of their job requirements. At some point, you may be handling or unloading hazardous materials, overseeing the preparation of hazardous materials for shipping, or be asked to sign off on a manifest. What is a manifest? Manifests are the shipping papers that follow materials from their point of origin to their point of disposal. At a minimum, the U.S. DOT requires shipping papers to show the basic description of a material, such as the UN identification number, proper shipping name, hazard class, and packing group, the number and types of packages, and the total quantity shipped. All of this information is included on the manifest. What does a signature on a manifest mean? It's much more than just handing over custody of hazardous material to the transport driver. There is a statement of certification as follows. I hereby declare that the contents of this consignment are fully and accurately described above by the proper shipping name and are classified, packaged, marked, and labeled or placarded, and are in all respects in proper condition for transport according to applicable international and national governmental regulations. In order to certify this is true, the signer must be DOT Hazmat trained. The U.S. DOT requires Hazmat employees, who are anyone whose actions can directly affect the transportation safety, to be trained. The elements of training include general awareness, function-specific, and security awareness training. This is an example of one of Atlantic Cape's typical regulated medical waste manifests. And this is what one of Atlantic Cape's typical hazardous waste manifests look like. They're difficult to read in this format, so there will be an attachment to this training course that you can print out on your own. We'll also be looking at these in a little bit more detail in later slides. What is the frequency of training? Initial training of new hazmat employees or an employee who changes job functions must be completed within 90 days of employment or change in job function. Recurrent training is required at least once every 3 years from the date of actual training. Training records. Employers must keep records regarding the hazmat employee's name, completion date of the most recent training, the training materials used, the name and address of the hazmat trainer, and certification that the hazmat employee has been trained and tested. Training records must be maintained for each hazmat employee for 3 years from the date of the last training and for 90 days after the employee leaves employment. What must I know? The hazmat training must include general awareness and familiarization of the regulations, be function specific, general safety awareness, and security awareness. The U.S. DOT lists 7 tips or steps to prepare hazmat for shipping. First, the material must be classified. Determine who the hazmat employees are. Determine if there are any registration requirements. Atlantic Cape does not have any. Select the approved packaging. Mark and label the package. Verify transport and placarding requirements, and prepare shipping papers. You can find these 7 tips at the U.S. DOT's website. So how do we classify material? First, we have to determine, is it a hazardous material? What is a hazardous material? A material that has been determined to be capable of posing an unreasonable risk to health, safety, and property when transported in commerce, and is listed in the hazardous materials table and its appendices. We will be going over the hazardous materials table. The hazardous materials table can be found at 49 CFR 172.101. We will be going over each column in the table. There's 10 columns with subcolumns that give all the information needed to properly ship a package. We'll start with column 1, symbols, which includes restrictions for the shipping of your material. This column lists shipping conditions for your material. This column may also be blank if there's no restrictions on your material that's being shipped. Please take a moment to review these conditions. Column 2 is the hazardous materials description and proper shipping name. Column 2 lists the hazardous materials in alphabetical order by their proper shipping name and description. Only approved proper shipping names can be used for the material. Column 3 is the hazard class or division. Column 3 identifies the material's hazard class. There are 9 primary classes of hazardous materials, including several subcategories or divisions. Any material labeled forbidden may not be transported. The 9 classes of hazardous materials are Class 1 explosives, Class 2 gases, Class 3 flammable liquids, Class 4 flammable solids, Class 5 oxidizers, Class 6 poisons, Class 7 radioactive, Class 8 corrosive, Class 9 miscellaneous. Column 4, identification number. Column 4 contains a unique identifier number associated with the proper shipping name. Numbers beginning with the letters UN are approved numbers used for international shipping. The numbers beginning with the letters NA are not approved for transportation outside of the U.S. Column 5, PG, is the packing group. Column 5 identifies the packing groups assigned to each proper shipping name. The packing group indicates the materials and types of containers that are required to ship the hazardous material safely. The packing groups are labeled 1, 2, and 3 to indicate the degree of danger of the material. Packing group 1 indicates great danger. Packing group 2 indicates medium danger, and packing group 3 indicates minor danger. Column 6 is label codes. Column 6 specifies the codes and the hazard warning labels required for shipping materials. These codes and labels are determined by the hazard class and proper shipping name. Some materials may require additional labels beyond those in column 6. The label codes and names can be referenced using the Code of Federal Regulations. A simple guide to the hazardous materials warning labels is available at the DOT website. Column 7 is Special Provisions. Column 7 contains special provisions associated with the hazardous material. They will appear as a list of codes that are defined in 172.102 of the Code of Federal Regulation. Multiple provisions can be listed in this column. These provisions can be classified even further with each form of transportation. The letters in these columns stand for the following. A is aircraft transportation, B is bulk packaging. IP or IB are transportation in intermediate bulk containers. N is non-bulk packaging, R rail transportation, T portable tanks, W water transportation. Numbers only codes apply to all shipments. The numbers after the above codes list the specific provisions relative to the categories. These provisions range from 1 to 441, so I didn't list them all, with more relating specifically to air transport, bulk packaging other than UN portable tanks, or IBCs, IBCs in large packaging, non-bulk packaging, and portable tank codes. Column 8 is packaging. Column 8 refers the shipper to 49 CFR 173 and specific requirements within that section of the regulations, such as 49 CFR 173 151. See the circled areas in the previous slide. Column 8 is dedicated to all packaging requirements and exceptions. This column is divided into 3 subcategories, 8A, 8B, and 8C. 8A will list any exceptions for the requirements. If none are listed in 8A, then no exceptions are required. 8B lists the packaging requirements for non-bulk packaging, and 8C is for bulk packaging. You have to refer to the regulations for the specifics. Column 9 is quantity limitations. Column 9 refers to the quantity limitations specific to air and rail shipping. Atlantic Cape only uses transporters that ship by truck. Column A specifies the maximum quantity for one package by passenger carrying aircraft or passenger carrying rail car, and 9B is for cargo aircrafts only. Some materials will be marked as forbidden, which means they cannot be shipped by either mode of transportation. Column 10 is vessel stowage. Column 10 refers to water vessels, and if a material can be stored on deck, below deck, or neither. Atlantic Cape only uses licensed transporters that ship by truck, so in large part, our materials will never be subject to columns 9 or 10 requirements. This is a lot of information to keep track of and can be difficult to recall. That's why the hazardous materials table is an important reference tool for any hazmat employee. Knowing how to read this table and where to find the necessary information can speed up reaction time during a crisis and keep employees safe. This is also why Atlantic Cape relies on licensed transporters to assist us with this task. While the transporter will assist us in the classification, proper packaging, labeling, and placarding, it is still ultimately Atlantic Cape's responsibility as the shipper. Now we'll revisit Atlantic Cape's most recent Hazardous Waste Manifest. I know it's very difficult to read, but the circled area indicates that we shipped out waste sulfur. Luckily, these paper manifests are uploaded into a database and put into an electronic format where you can more easily see that our waste sulfur was entered using all of the information we just spoke about from the hazardous materials table. Please take a moment to look at it. And here you can see how sulfur appears on the hazardous materials table, along with its unique identifier number, proper name, and the additional information regarding packaging and shipping. And here you can see from Sulfur Safety Data Sheet that all of the information on the hazardous materials table is reflected on the safety data sheet. This allows for uniformity through the shipping process and even through different countries. And as you may recall, some of the other hazardous materials that are shipped from Atlantic Cape include regulated medical wastes. Here are some examples of DOT-approved medical waste containers. Again, this is an example of Atlantic Cape's Regulated Medical Waste Manifest. And you can see while it looks different than the Hazardous Waste Manifest, it includes the proper shipping name, the individual ID number for regulated medical waste, and information about its packing group. And this is how regulated medical waste appears on the hazardous materials table. Placarding. Each bulk packaging, freight container, unit load device, transport vehicle, or rail car containing any quantity of a hazardous material must be placarded on each side and each end with the type of placard specified in the regulations. Atlantic Cape does not use transporters that transport our outgoing shipments by any other means than trucks. For our purposes, before we sign off on the manifest, we should make sure the truck is properly placarded. If it is not, we should provide the transporter with the appropriate placards. Table 1, listing placarding requirements, and Table 2 of the regulations, listing placarding requirements. And an example of the placards is available at the DOT's website, and the placards are very similar to the actual labeling on the packages. Atlantic Cape provides safety and security training through its HAZCOM GHS Right to Know, and PPE training modules, and department-specific training. Additional practices to be put in place while safely unloading and loading hazardous materials would include no smoking while loading or unloading hazardous materials, keeping them away from fire or flame, making sure that vehicle handbrakes are set, follow any specific lockout-tagout procedures that may be necessary, and packages must be secured against shifting, loaded in a means to prevent the likelihood of damage of any valves or fittings during transportation, loaded and maintained in accordance with any orientation arrows, and stored, loaded, or transported in accordance with the segregation table in the hazardous materials rules. The segregation table sets out the manner in which hazardous materials must be loaded, stored, or transported. X signifies materials that cannot be loaded, transported, or stored together, while O indicates materials that require separation to prevent mixing in case of leakage, and a blank space means no restrictions apply. Emergency response. Shipping papers must include the emergency response telephone number, which must be monitored at all times while the shipment is in transit. The contact person must be knowledgeable of the hazardous characteristics, emergency response information, and incident mitigation information for the shipment. Atlantic Cape's emergency response telephone number and contact person are those of the transporter contracted to package and transport the hazardous materials. In this example of a hazardous waste manifest, the emergency response telephone number is that of the contractor that package and is shipping the shipment. This presentation is available for download as a part of this training course for your future reference. You can also find additional information at the DOT's website, and you can find the Code of Federal Regulation at www.ecfr.gov. If you have any other questions about hazardous materials or hazardous waste, or any additional environmental or safety concerns, please contact Mary Simpson, the Compliance Officer. Start safe, work safe, finish safe.